So I'm going to talk about our work in child development. And the reason we're going to are interested in child development is because the inequalities that we see in society start at the very beginning. They start at conception. And even more so, there's mounting evidence that that basically, if we don't intervene early on to deal with these inequalities, the consequences are irreversible. And then we're starting to talk about policies that are much less effective in reducing inequalities. So the aim is to try and understand how we can reverse the developmental deficits of kids from deprived populations with suitable interventions, and suitable being effective and low cost, of course. Now, I will proceed with talking to you about our work here and trying to motivate it. Before I do that, I have to say that this is not only my work. I'm part of a large team. There are 3 people who are always with me in all these projects. Orazio Attanasio, Sally Grantham-McGregor, who is an eminent child development specialist and basically started this whole thing back in the 80s, and Marta Rubia Codina in the IDB. And then there are a number of other people who are involved in projects either in Colombia or in India. And of course, we always thank our funders, and the collection box is outside as you leave. You can also get your name on the slide. Okay, so let's look at some facts. This is data that we collected in Bogota. Now, one thing I'd like to say, what I say about developing countries here is not a particular feature of developing countries. It's much more a feature of poor populations. Now, it happens that there are many even more poor in developing countries than there are in let's say, Western countries, but that doesn't abstract from the problem. So, you shouldn't view this as an issue to do with development. You should view it as an issue to do with poverty. And the elements, we know that the elements in developing countries and in let's call them advanced countries, but among the poor population there are similar. Is somebody holding time? Yes, I've got a watch there. That's fine. Great. So this is data from Bogota. What are we looking at here? Look at 2 lines on each graph. The thick top line, this one here, and the dotted line here. And this relates to children from families which are about median income in Bogota. So let's call them middle class. Within our data, they are at the top quartile of the wealth distribution. But our data is focused mainly on poor to approximately median households. So these are your kind of middle class in Bogota. These are the lowest decile, the lowest quartile in Bogota. Obviously, these are very poor. And what you see here, on the horizontal axis, you've got the age of the child in months. So this is an 11-year-old, 6-month-old child. This is a 42-month-old child. And this gap is the gap in cognitive development. And what you see is that, first of all, there is a small gap already when the children are born, which is sizable and is probably attributable to nutritional issues during pregnancy and the first few months of life, because we are talking about 6 months there. But what's kind of striking, shocking, and you should be upset about that, is this huge gap that has opened up by 42 months. And this gap is absolutely massive. If you try and say, well, what does it correspond to in terms of standards of living? You're talking about somebody with income. This would translate to income differences of at least 60 to 70%, right? So these are very, very big gaps in developmental deficiencies. Now you see the gap in language as well. We use two kinds of measures of language. One is the simple one, receptive language, which is I tell a child show me the apple, and they show me an apple. While expressive language is a harder thing. I show them the apple, and they have to find the word. That, of course, comes later, right? Any of you who've learned a foreign language always probably find it easier to understand what your interlocutor is telling you rather than to express your own vocabulary. And so that's the motivation, right? The motivation is this widening gap in developmental levels between poorer and standard middle class kids. So, as economists, we call this human capital. Human capital is the set of skills that people collect and that effectively drives their standards of living. And human capital can be, underlies earnings, underlies health, crime, and indeed better outcomes for the kids, and hence the intergenerational transmission of poverty. So, inequality in human capital, is one of the key sources of inequalities in standard of living. So when we look at the society and we ask, what are the reasons for inequality? One of the key things we are looking at is of course inequalities in skills, inequalities in abilities, inequalities in human capital. So now we have increasing evidence that, as I said, that the early years are important. And the question is, of course, what do we really know, and how can we design effective and sustainable policies? And the broader question relates to the nature of interventions. Is it better to go to parents and, quote, teach them or show them how to bring up their kids, or is it better to just give them money? Okay? Now, I'm not going to be answering that question. That's, of course, a very important one for policymakers. But I will be focusing on interventions that are directly targeted at parents with their kids. Now, what's the brief history of this research area? In the U.S., we had the preschool experiment that dealt with kids that are 3 to 5 years old. That was in the 60s. The kids are still being followed. James Heckman is working a lot on that, and it's what it's called in the literature an efficacy trial. It's a very, very small, concentrated trial. It relates to 120 kids, 60 of them treated, 60 of them remained in control, randomized, and recent research has shown that the kids that were treated at that time have life-changing differences in their socio-emotional skills, even in their cognition, and in their crime rates. Okay, and the kind of headline figure there is just the decline in incarceration rates among the treated people justifies the cost of the program, which was not cheap. And then there's the Abecedarian program, again in the U.S., small trial, 111 kids that was followed. It treated the kids from birth to 11 and had also pretty dramatic results. But now I'm going to show you the intervention, the results of an intervention that was invented and carried out by Sally Grantham McGregor, and on which we base all our work. The study took place in Jamaica, and it targeted undernourished kids living in slums in Kingston. What did the program do? It took the kids, split them up into 4 groups. One is control and got nothing. And the other is just got pure nutrition, food supplements. And a third one got stimulation. That's the curriculum I will discuss in a little while here. And the fourth got both. I can cut it short by telling you that nutrition didn't do anything in the long run. So the nutritional supplements did not improve cognitive development or any other discernible effects in the long run. It did a bit in the short run. But what had the major impact was this stimulation curriculum. And this is the amazing graph here. What do you see? First of all, this is age of the child. This is 0, and this is 18 years. The intervention started when the kids were approximately, let's say, 6 months here. And the red line is the group that received the intervention, and that's their cognitive development. And the blue line is the control group. So what you see is that by the end of the intervention, the treatment kids got 80% of a standard deviation improvement in cognition, almost reaching the level of cognition. These are not really middle-class kids. They are still poor, but they are not malnourished. They are kind of less poor. And then, but the stunning thing about this is the fact that this intervention that took place only from up to this age here, which is about 33 to 48 months, then had sustained effects all the way to adulthood, right? So, and these differences are life-changing. They're really large differences. And in further work, they've been followed up in the labor market and analyzed by, that's Sally, and she, at that point, she teamed up with Heckman and Gertler and others. And these guys have much, much better labor market outcomes and everything. So now, so that sets the agenda. In some sense, what this tells you is you can do it, right? In other words, you can design an intervention that in the very early parts of life can be so effective as to actually change the, transform basically people who'd be totally poor to kind of normal middle class type, lower middle class type people with much, much better life outcomes, not only in the dimension of cognition, but in the labor market and so on. But this, of course, doesn't solve all our questions because, it's a trial that in total had 130 kids, of which about a quarter, let's say 40, were in the control group, right? 30. So our question now is how do you implement this at scale? How do you design such a program that you can roll it out in India and actually get, say, permanently lower poverty? Why do I say India? Well, not only because we work there, but in India you've got 70 million kids in risk of developmental deficits, right? That's a big number. You can imagine how many Luxembourgs are involved in 70 million. So it's a really big number. So if you're going to have an effect there, you're going to have, yeah.
How much stimulation did the children get?
So you're going to see this. Yeah, it's a 2-year program. So okay, so the policy challenge is how do you scale all this up? Now, let me give you a quick overview of the kind of interventions we've been working on. We've done 2 interventions in Colombia. One is a home visiting intervention, which I will describe. It lasted 18 months. It targeted not the ultra poor, but those who are beneficiaries of a conditional cash transfer program. We got quite large results there, but unfortunately 2 years later the results did die out. I'm going to talk about that again. Then we have a playgroup intervention, which was also very successful. And here we got effects from nutrition as well. And then in India, we're doing something that is super exciting. Why? Because we have an intervention that started when the kids were approximately 7 to 16 months. This intervention lasted for 2 years, and then we re-randomized the kids, and half of them went into high-quality preschool. So our total intervention is going to start more or less at 0 age, and it's going to finish when the kids are about 5 years old. Now, we're doing that because we want to answer the question as to when is it best to start and whether extending the intervention helps prevent any fade-out and reduction of the impacts in the long run. Okay, so perhaps the intensity of the small programs can be replaced by the length of a less intense program, which is more scalable in some sense. So our intervention is going to mimic a scalable delivery at implementation. And wherever possible, it's going to use existing government structures, right? It's going to graft on what's there, which of course reduces the cost. And the research design is going to be to collect detailed household data for both treatment and control groups, try and understand how parents react to the intervention and how they change their behavior. So, the curriculum. As I said, the work is based on the work of Grantham McGregor and her colleague Sue Walker on the Jamaica model. The intervention promotes child development in an integrated manner. That means it addresses cognition, language, and socio-emotional skills. This is executive function, self-control, things that are extremely important in the labor market, and motor skills. And it encourages the mothers to teach their children based on events surrounding daily routine activities. Right? What you find when you deal with poor populations, and that's not only in developing countries, that's in all countries, they speak to their kids much, much less or not at all. And just anecdotally, I was talking with one of the Colombian mothers, very young, single mother, 17, something like that. And I asked her, okay, do you talk to your baby? And she looked at me and in a very surprised fashion, she laughed a bit and said, of course not, he doesn't understand anything. So, but you know, this sounds like a joke, but it's a constant. It's everywhere, right? It's not that mother. I bet you it's in Luxembourg as well, among if there are any poor in Luxembourg. But certainly, there will be, it's in the US. It's been documented that poor families don't speak to their kids, and that's a key issue for brain development. So the curriculum involves picture books, pictures to stimulate conversation, puzzles, cubes, toys from recycled material, language, games, and songs. And the idea is that there's going to be a home visitor, and every week the home visitor is going to go to the household. She will have a laminated page. She will enter the household and she'll get the mother and the child together. If other kids want to participate, that's fine. She will get the mother to reenact what they did during the whole week. If she's satisfied that they did what they were supposed to do, the puzzles, the books, and all that, she will take all that stuff away, and then she will introduce a new set of activities, showing the mother how to engage with the child and these activities. This session will last for about an hour, right? The emphasis will be on, okay, this is what we did now, you should do it during the whole week, and then that's going to be repeated every week for about, depending on funding, for 1.5 or 2 years. So, you know, the kind of things, anybody who's a parent will not be surprised by this stuff. It's not rocket science, but in poor environments, you see nothing of that, right? Everything is completely devoid of any toys, activities, or even furniture often. So very simple puzzles, slightly harder puzzles, pictures to stimulate conversation with the mother so that they can offer subjects for storytelling. Obviously, everything adapted to the cultural environment. This is for India, right? The pictures here you can see are targeted at India. This is targeted at Colombia, right? So you need to create pictures and curricula that the kids relate to. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense. So they can make stories with that, and the home visitor will engage with the mother to show how she can make up stories and in conversation with her child, these things that are missing. Then there are toys from waste materials. Of course, the whole point of all this is that you're not going to go to the parents and say, you should be going to Toys R Us every week and buying a new car or a new whatever. You want to, you want to get them to construct toys from whatever they have. So we survey the waste materials that they have, and then we show them how to make toys. Rolls from toilet paper to construct castles, cars, whatever. And this is actually what the mother herself did, and she's showing us as a result of the curriculum. All right. So, of course, unfortunately, not all mothers respond that well, but that's the kind of idea. She did that, copying these kind of activities, which is exactly what you're aiming at, right? Okay. So. So the way we design it is, there's a pyramid. On the top of the pyramid, if you like, it's the researchers, it's us, and the child development people who design the curriculum. Then just below that, we have a group of, project managers and so on. That's not interesting. And then we have a group of mentors. Now the mentors are social workers, they tend to be college graduates, but there are very few of them. Now, what happens is that we train the mentors in delivering the curriculum, and then the mentors go into the communities and train the home visitors. Now, we're doing it like that, not because that's necessarily optimal, but because that's how you would scale it up, right? Because you're not going to have, first of all, you're not going to have hundreds of college graduates going and living in villages delivering a curriculum, right? You need local people. Why do you need local people? Otherwise, you've got a human resource problem, because you're not going to find all these college graduates, and you get a buy-in to the community because you've got one of them suggesting how to operate among these families. So you're not going to have some kind of white male professor from Yale going to a household every day saying you should do this with your kid. First of all, well, perhaps I don't have anything better to do. Perhaps that is a better thing for me to do, but I will not get buy-in by the community, right? So that's the first thing. So you have researchers, project managers, mentors. We train the mentors, and home visitors who are local. Right. Okay. So I've said this: each visitor visits the household once a week for 1 hour approximately, and the intervention lasts for about 18 to 24 months, depending on the case. So just to give you a slight idea of how these people look like in terms of characteristics, and the fact that the home visitors are not particularly different from the subject mothers. These are the mothers. This is Colombia. They have about 7.5 years of education, right? So that they finished elementary school and a little bit more. The home visitors have 8.5. So it's not fundamentally different, right? And in terms of ability, okay, I don't have to translate that in any detailed way, but the ability score of the Peabody vocabulary test is not very different between the mothers and the home visitors, but it is a bit better. It is a bit better, right? And so these home visitors are respected women from these communities, slightly higher level than the subjects, but not out of this world completely. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. So they're called madre leaders because. So in Colombia, you had this conditional cash transfer program where the government was offering welfare payments to families conditional on the families doing certain desirable things, like sending the older kids to school, having health checks, and things like that. And there are mediators between the government and the subject population who are elected by the local people. And these women are called madres líderes. And we try to use them as the conduit of the intervention because they are more respected and accepted.
What is special in these women? What strength do they have that they are respected?
So, in this particular case, they've been elected by the.
What do they have compared to other women?
They've been elected. They are sufficiently liked and respected to be chosen by the subject population to actually mediate between them and the government. But they don't have anything particularly special, and in some sense, that's exactly the point. Yeah.
Does the control group get any placebo?
In this intervention, the control group gets absolutely nothing. In another intervention in India, they get information about the available existing public services. Everybody gets that.
No visits,
No. No.
pressure on raising kids.
No. So this is how a home visit looks like. That's a good proportion of the entire household. This is the home visitor, right? This is the mother, and this is obviously the child. That's the puzzle they're making. Now, from the posture, you might actually see what's going on here. It's not really the home visitor is addressing herself to the mother, right? And getting the mother to help her child do the puzzle. Okay, so that's key, right? It's because it's a parenting program. So we've been trying other methods of delivering this kind of intervention. One is playgroups, and playgroups are really interesting for two reasons. One reason is they might be cheaper, right? Because one person deals with many families at the same time. The other reason is that it might encourage networking among women who, in these poor environments, are very often very isolated. Right? It's not. Poverty comes with isolation, comes with not having other people to talk to, and in some environments, women have come from different villages, so they don't even know anyone, right? When they have their first child. So that's another interesting mode of delivery. And okay, but I'll talk to you a little bit about that. All these interventions are tested by randomized controlled trials. That's of course crucial because we're not just going out there as a charity to try and implement some program that we think is interesting. We actually want to show the extent to which it's effective, and indeed we want to learn from this process to improve the program. I cannot tell you we've got all the answers here. This is a long process. What I can tell you is that when we get it right, this can be life-changing. But I can't tell you that we've got it right already. And we need a lot of experimentation, a lot of ideas, and a lot of work to do this. Let me try and give you an idea of how the population looks like that we're dealing with. This is Colombia. So Colombia is actually not as poor as you might think, right? It's a middle-income country. And so birth weight of kids are kind of normal, 3.2 kilos, 3.3 kilos. This is not, any red flag. You start getting red flags when you see stunting. That's about 16%. That means 16% of kids are below 2 standard deviations of WHO height. You should find 2.5% of people there, not 16%. Okay? A huge amount of anemia, 46%, 47% of anemia. That is a reflection of bad nutrition and possible disease. It's not necessarily lack of iron. It could be disease, diarrhea, things like that wash away all the nutrients. Right? And mothers are, in our sample are about 28 years old. They've got about a little bit more than elementary school. In Colombia, you've got quite a lot of single mothers, so about 70% are married, the 30% are single mothers. In India, there's no single motherhood. And one actually very important characteristic is that we have a very high incidence of clinically depressed women. About that number there translates to about 37% of clinical depression, right? Poverty is not fun, and it has its implications. Now, in India, so it's kind of quite similar, but mothers have a lower level of education. I'm not showing this here, but importantly, the kids are much more stunted. This is about 38. This number here, whatever it is, implies about 38% stunting, right? So, and stunting is a flag for long-term malnutrition. Okay, so let me show you some kind of results. Now, some results here are censored because the way that some journals work, they don't allow you to present numbers for unpublished stuff because then they consider it a publication and they don't publish it. Okay, so Colombia study has been studied. Odisha has been published in the BMJ. Odisha has not been. So here we get 26% of a standard deviation improvement in cognition. And for those of you more technically minded, this is an extremely significant effect. Now you might say, what does 26% of standard deviation mean? Well, I'll tell you, if you could sustain that, right, to adulthood, that would be equivalent to giving the kids 1 extra year of school. So it's a very big effect. Okay, so of course I put a huge if in front of it, right? If you can sustain that. We also improved language by approximately the same amount, and that's also significant. Receptive language, we didn't affect expressive language, and we never affect motor skills. But I'm kind of kind of convinced that they don't really have deficits in motor skills. So I'm not too worried about that. When I go to India, I can tell you that we're getting very significant effects there, and some might say are actually quite larger as well. Okay, so are we learning, or is the environment more deprived, and consequently these kind of interventions work better in an even poorer environment? Actually, there is a little bit of evidence of that, but that's for further research. So if we look at these results in some detail, we find certain interesting and / disturbing stuff. We found that the effect was much larger for boys. Now, we haven't pinned down the reason for that, and without wanting to become too technical, the experiment is not powered up enough to be able to start investigating that kind of detail. Yeah.
Is that true both in each country?
No, it's we only in Colombia we really didn't even have the power at all to look at that, and we get larger impacts for children with better educated mothers, better within that range, right? We're not talking, we're talking more than elementary or less than elementary. And the other thing that's kind of very consistent with the Jamaica result, we get much larger impacts for kids who are at baseline were malnourished. In other words, the worst of the worst. Okay. Now, a kind of a hint of the mechanisms. So, what this is telling you, this is Colombia. These are the various experimental arms. Stimulation, which is the main thing I've been talking about, stimulation and micronutrient supplementation, and micronutrients. We got no effect from micronutrient supplementation despite the anemia. Absolutely no effect. Okay? However, so the results I showed you before, these things here, are about stimulation. And what do you see? You see that parents in the stimulation group are now, as a result of the intervention, doing much more for their kids. Many more homemade toys. That's 0.91. I can assure you is a very large number. It's basically going from a very low number to a very high number. A few extra bought toys, of course that's harder because these are expensive. But many more play materials in the home, many more play activities carried out, and just as a placebo, no difference in, say, books for adults or things like that. It's not as if they're just doing everything more in their life. They're doing much more targeted to the kids. And you can see that, of course, both in stimulation and these two things we treat together, all right? And the micronutrient branch, they just don't do much more. And the micronutrients themselves did not have any impact. Again, we don't completely understand why. The point about the research is that you can't answer all questions with one project, and you are left with certain open questions. However, we do have evidence that they were delivered. Now, the other thing, in India, we found similar kind of things. We have an index for the quality of the home environment that it really improves a lot. And even very, very interesting, we get a decline in maternal depression. So mothers are much, much less depressed as a result of the intervention. And this index of knowledge of child development, we're never able to shift it, but we have some ideas there. Now, how much does all this cost? Well, let's look at India. In India, it costs $107 per year per child. Now, is that a lot? It's probably a good meal out in Luxembourg in a nice restaurant. But actually, the GDP per capita in India is 1,700. Okay, so is that a lot? I don't know. I mean, obviously, you're not rolling out this for all kids. You have to target it to a very, very poor. Often I talk to people in the World Bank and they say, oh, this is too expensive. It's not scalable. So what do you want? You want to achieve something for nothing? Well, to anybody who is a politician in this room or anybody else, you cannot get anything for nothing, right? So you get exactly nothing for nothing, right? So of course, it does cause a budgetary issue, but that's where we have to make our trade-offs work, right? If we can be really convinced that this is going to change the levels of poverty, right? Then it's probably a pretty good cost-benefit ratio. In Colombia, as I said, look at it's a much wealthier country, 6,300 per capita, right? And it costs $500 per child. Of course, a lot of this is labor costs, right? It's how much, because you have to pay all these women and the mentors and the training and all that, they have to be paid. So that doesn't include the research costs, of course, right? On the other hand, the government itself would be able to have economies of scale there, which of course we cannot exploit. Okay. So as I said, the Colombia intervention, the effects we got actually faded out. We've published that in PLOS Medicine, and that was of course very disappointing. There's a hint, if you allow me, I'm really sorry, I should have better links, but I don't. If we go back here, there's a hint at that, right? Because half the benefit was lost. But you're talking about an enormous benefit here, right? So we have less than half the benefit up front. And if you're going to have a natural fade out, you better have a much larger benefit up front. Or, as we are hoping, by sustaining the intervention for longer periods of time, then perhaps you can avoid the fade out completely. And despite the fact you cannot have such a big effect in a scalable type program, you can maintain the effect in the long run. Okay, so another approach that we've done is we've tried play groups. Now this was a kind of a very nice intervention we had the opportunity to carry out in Colombia, and now we're designing something for India. No, we're doing it in India as well. So in Colombia there are these childcare centers where mothers with newborns can just go there and have a discussion and some advice and so on, but they don't do anything, right? So we partnered with a foundation from a large supermarket chain there, and they provided food supplementation, and we provided a curriculum and training of what are called the family mothers. And and they create little groups every week. All these young mothers are coming with their, in this case, actually even newborns, which is, so we're getting them earlier, and they deliver our curriculum. Of course, it's quite challenging because they have a range of ages there. They have the 0, 1 or 2 month old kids, and then they have the 6 month old kids. They have the 1 year old kids. So they have to, it's a challenging thing to train people to do, to engage everybody. We did it in 87 towns. We had 1,500 kids. And what I want to show you here, now this is a much smaller intervention, right? It lasted for about 12 months or something like that. But we still got a 15% standard deviation improvement in cognition, which is significant. And we reduced the percentage of kids, this is 6%, 5.8%, who are too short because of malnutrition. Now, and to the extent that malnutrition then feeds into cognition or other kind of health issues, that's an important. Now, why are we achieving a nutritional benefit here, which we did not achieve in Colombia? First of all, in Colombia, we only gave them micronutrients. Secondly, these kids, many of these kids are coming to the center earlier, not at 6 months or 1 year. They're coming they're there at weaning time, which is 6 months. So while in the other Colombia intervention, we got kids around between 1 and 2 years old. That may even be too late. So the fact that we're giving better nutrition really at the time of weaning may have had an effect of, and of course, advice about stopping to breastfeed or introducing solids and all that seems to have had an effect. So this means taking them away from the lower part of a distribution and putting them in the middle part of a distribution. And you can see these two numbers exactly match up. So, so as I said, so I'm going to complete now by just describing a little bit some of the other work we're doing. Okay, so first of all, the big thing is that we're doing this long-term intervention from 0 to 5 years old in India. This is going to finish either around the end of the year, or if we get some more money, we'll drive it another 6 months. And this, we will have a cohort of kids that some of them will have been treated from age 7 months all the way to school. Some of them will have started in the middle and up to school. Some of them we have only done the first bit, so we can start addressing the question of how much it matters to start early, whether kids that are treated in the later catch up, and whether continuing with the intervention actually helps sustain the effects. And then the question we want to ask is, how do these interventions work? Now, we think, and we have actually practical evidence, which I will not present here, that the intervention works because you're changing parental behavior. And we have both positive evidence on that, and we have negative evidence on that. For example, in the intervention that I told you the results faded out, we also observed that the parents stopped behaving differently than the control group. They reverted back to the kind of parenting behavior that the control group has. So what we introduced in the household was not sustained. On the other hand, we see that the intervention actually during its operation actually shifted parental behavior. You remember I showed you this colorful table, which was showing that. So the key point I'm trying to make here is that these interventions are parenting interventions. It doesn't make sense to say, okay, I'm going to go one hour a week in every household, I'm going to play a little puzzle with a child, and this child is going to exit poverty. That's not the point. The point is that you need to affect parental behavior fundamentally and shift it. And in some sense, this is, as I said, not rocket science. Many of you have kids. You all do that kind of thing, and we see that parents from different socioeconomic strata behave very, very differently in this respect. Now, there's always this question as to why they behave. Is it knowledge? Is it other constraints? What is it? Of course, that's a big research question. However, our intuition from this kind of work is that a key element in our fight against poverty are parenting programs that improve the interaction between parents and kids in very low income families. Thank you.